Have you ever wondered what $96 million worth of family betrayal feels like? I'm Noelle Quincy, and tonight was the inheritance dinner everyone had been waiting for. That's when my father finally said it out loud. He lifted his glass, smiled at my little brother, the same brother who had only been home for 4 weeks, and announced, "Everything, the company, the houses, the accounts, all $96 million, now belongs to Ben." My mother nodded proudly. "He deserves it more than you ever did." The room burst into applause. I got up slowly, walked to the head of the table, and placed 4 things right in front of my father: the old medical and financial power of attorney paperwork he and Mom had signed years ago when they could barely hold a pen, the house keys, the safe keys, and one thick envelope sealed with red notary wax. I looked straight at Ben. "Congratulations." Then I turned and started walking toward the door. Dad let out a small laugh, assuming the envelope was just some dramatic goodbye letter. But he tore it open right there in front of 20 relatives and his oldest friends. His eyes hit the first line, then the second. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. "You've got to be kidding me," he exploded, slamming his hand on the table so hard the plates jumped. "This is insane." Mom shouted. Ben didn't move. Everyone stared at me as I kept walking away. If you've ever been treated like you're worth nothing after giving everything, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next is exactly why you should never underestimate the quiet one. Keep watching. 5 years ago, I was living the dream in Seattle. I was a senior software engineer at a health tech unicorn, making just under $300,000 a year, leading a 12-person AI team that was about to close Series C. My schedule was filled with investor dinners and keynote invitations. Then one Tuesday morning at 5:47 a.m. Pacific Time, my phone rang. It was the charge nurse at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. My dad had collapsed at the office, a massive ischemic stroke. They were rushing him into emergency surgery. By the time I landed at MSP 4 hours later, he was already in a medically induced coma, machines breathing for him. 2 days after that, Mom went in for what she thought was bronchitis. It turned out to be stage 3 lung adenocarcinoma. Chemo started the following Monday. She lost 32 pounds in 6 weeks and could barely lift a coffee cup. I took indefinite unpaid leave that same week, packed 2 suitcases, sublet my Capitol Hill apartment, moved back into my childhood bedroom in Edina. The company in Seattle said, "Take all the time you need." They replaced me in 9 days. That first year blurred into a loop of fluorescent hospital lights and antiseptic. I slept on the vinyl recliner in Dad's ICU room more than 300 nights. I learned how to suction his trach when the night nurse was behind. I mixed Mom's chemo at home when she was discharged because home health was short-staffed. By month 8, I could start in 4 in the dark. Dad finally woke up after 6 weeks in a coma, but the stroke stole his speech for 8 solid months. He could only nod, or squeeze my hand twice for yes and once for no. Mom's hands shook so badly she couldn't sign her own name. A hospital social worker sat me down with their estate attorney. Minnesota law is simple. If both parents are incapacitated, someone has to hold medical and financial power of attorney or the state steps in. They both signed the documents that same afternoon, shaky X's witnessed by 2 nurses and a notary who came to the neurology floor. That signature made me the acting CEO of Quincy Medical Supply overnight. 0 paycheck attached. I was 30 years old, running a 90-person company that built ventilators and portable X-ray machines, while pushing Mom's wheelchair to radiation every morning. I taught myself corporate finance from YouTube videos and SEC filings at 2 a.m. after the night nurse left. I signed vendor contracts, approved payroll, and negotiated with insurance companies, all while Dad watched from his hospital bed with eyes that apologized for what he couldn't say. Meanwhile, my little brother Ben had disappeared completely. Last anyone heard, he was in Phoenix, deep into opioids after a construction site back injury. He'd been arrested for possession with intent 18 months before Dad's stroke. The Arizona court gave him a choice: 12-month mandatory residential rehab or prison. He chose rehab. The program had a no-contact rule for the first 6 months, and after that, nothing. He just never called again. Mom kept his bedroom exactly the same, like he was away at college, instead of ignoring every message we sent. I didn't have time to search for him. Every dollar the company made kept the factory open and paid for Mom's experimental immunotherapy that insurance denied twice. I fought those denials myself. Wrote the appeals. Flew to Chicago to meet medical directors. Dad started speech therapy and could finally whisper, "Thank you," around month 14. Mom's scans showed shrinkage for the first time. I let myself believe we were turning a corner. I was wrong, but that corner was still 3.5 years away. One morning, at 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. I was buried in payroll reports and hadn't slept in 31 hours. I opened the door while holding a cold mug of coffee, and there was Ben, standing on the porch with nothing but a faded army green duffel bag. He looked thinner, clean-shaven, with clear eyes I hadn't seen since he was 17. "I finished the program," he said. 14 months clean. Court-ordered rehab in Arizona. They let me out 3 weeks ago. Mom rushed from the kitchen wearing her robe. She took one look at him and collapsed into his arms, sobbing, like he'd returned from a war zone. Within an hour, she'd called every relative within 100 miles. By noon, the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and second chances. And that same afternoon, the rewriting began. Mom sat Dad down in his recliner and said loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway, Ben had been finding himself out west, that he'd been networking with suppliers in Phoenix, and that he'd enrolled in online business courses. Every ugly truth was smoothed over and replaced with a shiny new version. By dinner, the official family story was locked in place. Ben had never been an addict. He was an entrepreneur in training. The next day, he walked into the company like he'd never left. Mom led him straight to the executive floor and introduced him as the future of Quincy Medical Supply. The COO, Mark, a man whose job existed because I kept that company alive for half a decade, shook Ben's hand like he was royalty and asked if he wanted the corner office repainted. 3 days later, my login stopped working. I called IT. They said the COO had ordered a full password reset for security reasons. Translation: my access was gone. Board meeting invites stopped appearing, too. When I asked Dad, he just shrugged. Mom thought it was time Ben took the reins. I kept showing up anyway. I slipped in through the factory entrance before dawn and worked from a forgotten cubicle on the 3rd floor. I approved purchase orders that somehow never got countersigned, fixed pricing errors that would have cost us 6 figures, and sent emails no one responded to. At night, I drove home, microwaved leftover lasagna, and coded on my laptop until sunrise, building something no one in that house knew existed. Ben started running daily stand-ups in the conference room I used to lead. He wore crisp shirts Mom ironed for him and repeated buzzwords he barely understood: synergy, vertical integration, disruptive growth. Employees who once brought me coffee now brought him coffee. The few who still nodded at me in the hallway did it quickly, eyes down, like acknowledging me might get them in trouble. Mom redecorated his old bedroom that first weekend: new mattress, new desk, framed photos from when he was quarterback in high school. She hung a sign on the door: Ben, future CEO. When I walked past that bedroom door, it felt like the walls tightened around me. Dad's speech had improved enough for short sentences, and he started asking Ben's opinion on everything: inventory levels, new product lines, whether we should bid on the Coleman regional contract. Every time I tried to give input, Mom cut me off with a smile that never touched her eyes. "Let your brother handle it, honey. You've done enough." I stopped arguing. I just nodded, went back to my shadow workstation, and kept the company alive while they planned a victory parade for someone who had vanished during the entire war. Then came the night everything blew open. The chandelier was blazing, lighting up the dining room like a showroom. 22 place settings sat perfectly arranged under crisp white linen. Silver chimed against crystal as the caterers poured the second round of champagne. Everyone who mattered in our little Minnesota empire was there. Uncles still serving on the board, cousins who owned dealerships, Dad's oldest golf buddies, even the family minister. Dad stood at the head of the table wearing a midnight blue suit Mom had picked out that morning. His voice had grown stronger over the last year. He didn't even need the microphone someone had set up just in case. "Tonight isn't just dinner," he began, raising his glass a little higher. "Tonight, we pass the torch to the next generation, to the person who has proven he belongs at the helm." He turned and placed a hand on Ben's shoulder. My brother was wearing the same proud grin he'd been practicing in the mirror for weeks. "Last week, I signed the final documents," Dad continued. $96 million in company equity, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, everything now belongs to Benjamin. A wave of applause rolled through the room. Someone whistled. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed napkin. Mom squeezed Ben's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then she looked straight at me across the rosemary-crusted lamb and gave me the sweetest, coldest smile I'd ever seen. "He deserves it far more than you ever did, Noelle." The words landed like a clean cut. A few cousins shifted awkwardly. Uncle Ray tried to start another round of applause, but it fizzled quickly. I pushed my chair back and stood. The room fell silent, the way people go still when they sense blood in the water. I walked the length of the table, my heels silent on the Persian rug, and stopped right beside Dad. Then I placed 4 items in the center of the white tablecloth, one at a time. First, the original medical and financial power of attorney, creased from years in my safe. Second, the house keys on the old brass ring Dad gave me the day I moved back. Third, the single key to the gun safe and document vault in his study. Fourth, a thick manila envelope sealed with red notary wax, my initials embossed across the flap. Every eye in the room followed my hands. The chandelier light made the wax shimmer like fresh blood. I met Ben's stare, calm, steady. "Congratulations," I said quietly, just loud enough for the closest people to hear. Then I turned and walked toward the archway that led to the foyer. Dad let out a short, dismissive laugh, the same laugh he used when I was 12 and begged to tag along on his fishing trips. He thought he knew exactly what was inside the envelope, a resignation, a tear-stained apology, maybe one last desperate plea. He picked up the envelope, slid his butter knife under the seal, and tore it open right there between the creme brulee and the port. The first page slipped out. His eyes scanned the header, then the second line, then the third. The butter knife clattered against the porcelain plate. Every bit of color drained from his face so fast I could see it from 20 feet away. He looked up at me, mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out, until he finally roared loud enough to shake the crystal. "You've got to be kidding me." Mom shot halfway out of her chair. "Richard, what is it?" He couldn't answer. Dad just kept staring at the papers, his hand shaking like the pages were burning him. His roar was still echoing off the crown molding when he finally managed to speak again. He held the documents up as if they were toxic, reading aloud with a voice cracking between anger and disbelief. 18 months ago, while I was still in a coma and your mother was barely conscious from chemotherapy, Noelle Quincy, acting under a valid Minnesota medical and durable financial power of attorney, transferred 98% of all Class A voting shares of Quincy Medical Supply into the Quincy Health Foundation Irrevocable Trust. He stopped, swallowed hard, then continued. With Lauren Brooks, licensed Minnesota estate planning attorney, appointed sole trustee. The trust is irrevocable under Minnesota Statutes Section 501C. This instrument dated and notarized at Mayo Clinic Rochester. Effective tonight, upon formal notification to all financial institutions, the freeze clause activates. No transfer, sale, pledge, or distribution involving prior shareholders may occur without trustee consent. Any attempt to revoke or amend is void. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Uncle Ray's mouth literally fell open. Aunt Linda's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. No one bent down to clean it. Dad's hand trembled so violently the papers rattled. This can't be legal, he rasped. Gregory Hayes, Dad's old college roommate, 35-year board member, and the man who managed the company's main banking relationship, felt his phone buzz against his chest. He pulled it out, checked the screen, and went sheet white. Richard, he said softly, holding up the phone so everyone could see the U.S. bank alert. All operating accounts, line of credit, merchant services. Everything is frozen as of midnight tonight. They're citing the trust notification that just hit their legal department. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal and slid sideways out of her chair. Two cousins rushed to catch her before she hit the ground. Ben shot to his feet, his face twisted toward me where I stood beneath the archway. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted, veins standing out along his neck. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The documents were speaking loud enough. Dad kept flipping through pages, his voice climbing higher with each paragraph. Contingent beneficiary upon trustee discretion. Quincy Health Systems LLC, a Minnesota entity formed 3 years ago for the purpose of, he stopped mid-sentence, eyes wild. You built another company. With whose money? He didn't wait for me to respond. He already knew exactly whose sleepless nights had paid for it. Gregory tried again, gentler this time. Rich, I just got off the phone with our relationship manager. The freeze is ironclad. They won't even let us make tomorrow's payroll without trustee approval. We're locked out. Someone's wife started crying quietly into her napkin. The minister stared down at his plate like he'd forgotten what food was. Ben lunged across the table, knocking over water glasses and reaching for the papers. Dad jerked them away, clutching them to his chest like letting go would make them disappear. You think you can steal my company? Dad shouted at me. After everything we gave you? I finally spoke, calm, steady. You signed the power of attorney yourself. Mom signed it the same day. You were both lucid enough to understand exactly what it meant. Minnesota doesn't let you undo it just because you changed your mind later. Mom, still half on the floor, whimpered. We thought you were helping us, not robbing us. I looked at her for a long moment. I was helping you survive. You just forgot to notice who kept you alive. Ben slammed both hands on the table. We'll sue. We'll fight this. But Lauren Brooks's name was on every page, along with the seal of the Minnesota Secretary of State. Irrevocable meant irrevocable. Every attorney in the room knew it. Gregory just shook his head slowly. Dad slumped back into his chair like someone had cut his strings. The papers slipped from his hands and scattered across the tablecloth. One sheet landed in a puddle of melted butter. The chandelier kept shining, bright, cold, merciless, on 22 people who suddenly realized the empire they'd gathered to celebrate no longer belonged to any of them. Phones started buzzing before the caterers even cleared dessert. Gregory's lit up first with another bank alert, then Dad's, then every board member who still had the company app installed. The same red banner glowed on every screen. Access revoked. Trust freeze in effect. Aunt Linda grabbed her coat, muttering about an early morning. Uncle Ray followed right behind her without finishing his port. Within minutes, the driveway was full of reversing taillights. Nobody said goodbye. By the time the last guest drove off, the official email from Coleman Regional Health Network hit the executive distribution list. The subject line was simple: selection of vendor for enterprise-wide operating system. I had already read it an hour earlier. Coleman, 18 hospitals across Minnesota and western Wisconsin, the same $62 million contract everyone thought Dad's company would win without competition, had chosen Quincy Health Systems. My company. The one I registered in a tiny WeWork in downtown Minneapolis 3 years ago, coding after midnight while the factory floor below continued stamping out ventilators under the old family name. The email was short and painfully direct. After an extensive evaluation, Coleman Regional Health Network announced its partnership with Quincy Health Systems LLC for full AI-driven patient flow, supply chain, and revenue cycle management. Implementation would begin in Q1. Dad read the message out loud in the now empty dining room, his voice flat. Ben grabbed the phone from him, scrolled, and then threw it against the stone fireplace. The screen shattered, scattering pieces across the hearth. At 8:17 the next morning, every employee at Quincy Medical Supply received the same mass text from HR. Due to unforeseen banking restrictions, payroll processing for the current period has been suspended. Further updates to follow. By 9, the factory WhatsApp groups were exploding. Forklift drivers shared photos of the front gates chained shut by the bank's repo team. The head of accounting live-streamed herself crying in the parking lot after her direct deposit alert bounced. The family's longtime attorney, Tom Erickson, finally returned Dad's 19th call. I could hear every word from the hallway. Richard, I'm sorry. Conflict of interest. Lauren Brooks is now on retainer with the trust. I can't represent you against it. You'll need new counsel. Then he hung up. Ben vanished upstairs. 10 minutes later, the sound of breaking wood and smashing glass echoed from the second floor. Mom ran up the steps screaming his name. Something heavy hit the hallway carpet. Later we learned it was the mahogany dresser she bought him for graduation. Dad sat on the bottom step with his head in his hands, staring at the scattered trust papers like he couldn't read them. He kept whispering numbers to himself, 96 million, 62 million, the mortgage balance, Mom's medical bills that were still arriving. I stood in the kitchen, drinking coffee I couldn't taste, and watched the collapse of the company in real time. By noon, the Star-Tribune had the story on its website. Someone at Coleman leaked the vendor announcement. Someone at the bank leaked the freeze. The headline was blunt: Minneapolis medical supply giant locked out overnight. New AI startup takes crowning contract. My phone buzzed with something different, a Series B term sheet from a Silicon Valley fund I'd quietly spoken with for 6 months. They had increased their valuation after hearing about the Coleman contract. I sent back a simple thumbs up and locked the screen. Upstairs, Ben had punched holes through the drywall and was now crying on the landing. Mom tried to hold him the way she used to when he was 9 and broke his arm at hockey practice. He shoved her away so hard she stumbled into the banister. Dad didn't move. He kept staring at the same paragraph in the trust paperwork, the one stating in plain language that not a single share could ever be returned. Minnesota law made it final. No exceptions. The house grew quiet except for the occasional crash upstairs and Mom's broken pleas. I set my empty mug in the sink, grabbed the small overnight bag I'd packed 2 days earlier, and walked out the front door without saying a word. The cold November air felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. 9 months later, the for sale sign in front of the Adina house was faded and leaning to one side. The old Quincy Medical Supply sign on County Road 18 had been removed in the spring and replaced with a temporary banner that read auction, everything must go. Chapter 11 had lasted just 11 weeks. Creditors went after the company as soon as the bank statements hit the court docket. The judge converted it to Chapter 7 liquidation far quicker than anyone expected. By June, the factory machines were sold off in batches to a distributor from Chicago. The office furniture went to a startup incubator for almost nothing. The company that once employed 90 people in the northwest suburbs simply disappeared. The house followed 5 months after the first missed mortgage payment. The mortgage had been in Mom and Dad's names only. The trust never touched real estate. U.S. Bank filed for foreclosure in Hennepin County District Court and won by default. The sheriff's sale took place on a Tuesday morning in August. A young couple from Eden Prairie bought the home for 62 cents on the dollar. They posted the closing photos on Instagram the same week: new quartz counters, fresh paint, everything bright. There was no sign of the family that had lived in that house for 27 years. Ben lasted 73 days after the eviction. He tested positive for fentanyl the first time he tried to see Mom. 2 weeks later, Minneapolis PD found him asleep in a stolen Civic with a backpack full of pills. The public defender secured a deal, 18 months at MCF Lino Lakes, with mandatory chemical dependency treatment. Mom cried when they put him in cuffs. Dad didn't show up to the hearing. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in St. Louis Park. Second floor, south-facing, $1,180 a month, heat included. Dad's Social Security and early retirement pension totaled $416 combined. Mom's Medicare Advantage covered most of her maintenance chemo, but the co-pays swallowed half of every check. They used SNAP for groceries and kept the thermostat at 62. Every lawsuit they filed collapsed the same way. They tried 3, one in state court claiming undue influence, one in federal court for breach of fiduciary duty, and one emergency motion to reverse the trust. Every judge pointed to the same facts. The medical and financial powers of attorney were signed when both grantors were still legally competent, witnessed by Mayo Clinic staff, notarized, and properly recorded. Minnesota law does not accept regret as a basis for undoing a valid instrument. Each case was dismissed with prejudice, with attorney fees charged to the plaintiff. Dad aged 10 years in 9 months. His hair turned fully white. He quit golf. He stopped answering old friends. Some mornings he sat on the tiny balcony in his robe, staring at the parking lot until nightfall. Mom tried once to reach me. She made a new Gmail account at the public library and sent one message: "We're sorry. Please come see us. We have nothing left." I didn't reply. The email went to an inbox I shut down that same week. The last time I drove by the old house, the new owners had decorated for Halloween. Glowing skeletons on the lawn. Orange lights in the trees that used to be mine. The porch where Ben and I learned to ride bikes now had a welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home" in cheerful block letters. I kept driving. Today I'm on the 42nd floor of Capella Tower in downtown Minneapolis, watching the sunlight hit Lake Calhoun the way it did when I was a kid biking around it every summer. The glass wall in front of me displays our logo, Quincy Health Systems, NASDAQ, QHS. We rang the bell 4 months ago. The opening price valued the company at $1.9 billion. The stock has more than doubled since. My office covers half the floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, white oak, a single orchid on the credenza. No framed photos. No family reminders. No trace of Edina, hospital waiting rooms, antiseptic, or betrayal. I changed everything the week I walked out: new phone, new email, new accounts. I blocked every cousin, every old classmate who still remembered Mom's landline. My assistant screens all messages. None have reached me. Some nights I check the old house on Zillow out of habit. The photos rotate every few months: new paint, new furniture, new people smiling in rooms that used to be mine. The algorithm thinks I'm shopping for real estate. It has no idea I'm only checking that the past is still gone. I never went back. Not for Christmas. Not for Dad's birthday. Not when Ben overdosed the second time and the social worker from Hennepin County Medical Center called looking for next of kin. I let it ring until voicemail stopped trying. People ask if I feel guilty, reporters mostly. They're hoping for tears or a dramatic pause. They want the story of the daughter who built an empire out of revenge and now suffers for it. I don't. But I don't feel victorious either. Revenge loses its taste fast. What I feel is quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only when the noise has finally stopped. I kept the company alive when no one else would. I turned 5 years of sleepless nights into software that now predicts patient readmissions with 94% accuracy across 18 hospital systems. I created 380 good jobs in a city that watched the old factory rust shut. I funded 2 free clinics in North Minneapolis that carry my mother's maiden name, not for her thanks, but because I could. That's what outsiders never understand. This wasn't about taking something from them. It was about refusing to let my sacrifices become someone else's unearned victory. I still sign documents as Noel Quincy because the SEC requires it, but the name feels like a coat someone else lent me. I haven't spoken it out loud to another person in over a year. When people ask what the Q stands for, I tell them it means quiet. Some lessons cost a lot, but they're still lessons. Never give more than you can afford to lose. Never confuse tolerance with forgiveness. Never assume the people who need you today will remember you tomorrow. And if the day comes when they try to hand your work to someone who didn't bleed for it, remember that the law can be a tool if you're willing to use it while everyone else applauds. I don't forgive. I don't look back. And I no longer carry their name into my future.